welcome to the BPD Bunch. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Katja, Georgette, Jack, and Jay. We're continuing our conversation from Wednesday about BPD at school. If this or other BPD-related topics interest you, please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you do not miss anything. Today we're going to talk about getting accommodations or reasonable adjustments, as well as whether or not we disclose our diagnosis at school. So one of the things that people ask when they're searching about BPD in school online is whether or not BPD qualifies as a disability in a school setting. There's not really like a black or white answer to this. At least in the United States, BPD can potentially be considered as a disability, but disability here is defined very loosely. Like, there are not specific conditions that are covered. If a condition is sufficiently debilitating, then it potentially can be covered, which means that essentially everything is on a case-by-case basis. So we have included in links down below some different information. Some of it is from one of the charities that we've worked with in the past, Emotions Matter, and it covers in more detail how you can go about requesting accommodations. So have you ever used accommodations for BPD in a school setting? Why or why not?
I never chose to. I was kind of forced to after a while. My schools ended up setting me up with guidance counselors and school therapists, all of that, a whole team of them, to try to figure out what was wrong with me and how to avoid any more accidents. So yeah, so my parents never really like, hey, Jack has this, he needs accommodations. It was like the school like, hey, we noticed Jack has a small temper problem, so we need him to talk with the school therapist twice a week for until the end of the school year type of deal. When I was in school, mental health was technically still in its infancy. So even if I did want help, a lot of my teachers, the school system would have known what to do. Not only that, but the information was available. The internet was still in its infancy too. They would have known what to look to for the information of how to adjust and provide help for me correctly, because I was schooling in early 2000s. So like Google wasn't all there, so I could just Google and look it up real quick. My parents could have done it. So nobody could really have gave me the right adjustments and just making things more comfortable for me, because again, they didn't know. So all this stuff was still very new, and mental health and all this was new. So they would have no idea about borderline personality disorders.
I have tried, but every place that I've tried to access them at really don't know what to do with it beyond suggesting that I, can have some extensions on work whenever I need it, which is quite a standard thing. So they don't really know what to do with it. And I've also had other moments where people have sort of almost taken it as like I might manipulate it. So they've sort of been like, oh, but you can't just have extensions 24/7, you need to make sure that you actually need them, blah, 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 blah. So they just sort of made it feel like I shouldn't access those because I'm going to be viewed negatively. But, at the same time, I'll be honest, I think it was difficult for me to also tell them what I wanted them to do, because I didn't know what they could do. I didn't know what I needed. I was very new to the diagnosis. I'm obviously talking about my time during my master's program, because I didn't have the diagnosis before that. And then not long after I got the diagnosis, COVID happened. So there wasn't really a need for it anymore. During my current degree now, it's just not really as much of an issue. I haven't needed formal accommodations as such. But I suppose most of that's probably due to luck, having a supervisor and whatnot that I can actually speak to and say when I'm not able to do something and what I need from them. Is usually just understanding.
I was diagnosed so late in life that I didn't even know to ask for any accommodations. And I think because school was this like safer place for me, that I probably wouldn't have used them in the first place. As a parent, I know, as a parent in the United States and in the state of New Jersey, I'm familiar with the IEPs, or individualized education plans, that a child can get if necessary based on different diagnoses. And it doesn't always have to be a learning disability type diagnosis. I think that's what we think about, but it can also be if you have some type of behavioral diagnosis that, you know, BPD would fall under, that also can qualify you for this individualized education plan, or IEP, that can really help with making sure that you get the accommodations you need in school. And then the accommodations that are given are like, if you need to leave class for a little bit, if you need to have space to go and be quiet and collect yourself in between classes, or if you know, at lunchtime. So schools can accommodate these things kind of based on each individual kid. So it might be that you have a different PE class. It might be that you are allowed to leave a classroom and go to like a counselor's office to calm down. Sometimes it's maybe you collect your work and you could do your work in a private place. So there are these accommodations that are available, and it just kind of depends on the kid and the diagnosis and the reason for the IEP.
Yes, the IEP is listed in the Emotions Matter publication that is linked below. And so I highly recommend for anyone who's interested to read through that because they also give tips on how to approach your school about it.
When I was at school, mental health support was very much in its infancy. It was there, but it wasn't amazing. And when I tried to access that help, the attitude or the pervasive view at the time was that if you were a high academic achiever, which I was, that you couldn't possibly need any help, like you were fine, because if anyone had problems with mental health, then obviously their education would be suffering and they would be the ones that were, you know, bottom of the class or not turning up. So I felt like that was definitely a blockade for me. People just didn't want to help because I didn't fit their view of what somebody with a mental health problem looked like. And then as I've come into working in education, things have obviously improved since then. They will look at the reasonable adjustments that can be put in place for you in your working environment to make your condition more manageable and more conducive to the work that you do. Reasonable adjustments do have to be just that. They have to be reasonable. Like, I can't say, okay, I've got borderline personality disorder, so even though I'm applying for a full-time job, like I can only work Thursdays and Tuesdays and things like that. Like, it does have to be in their interest too. So for me, I have quite a few reasonable adjustments in place. For BPD in particular, I have my PPA, which is planning and preparation time for lessons. I also don't teach certain topics. I will leave a little bit earlier if I'm going through medication changes and things like that, because it can make me more tired. So they're all things which are just that, they are reasonable. They're not going to cost the employer anything. And if it does, it's in the short term. So for example, if I'm not teaching one of those classes that I mentioned earlier, I will swap with another teacher and take their lesson instead, so it makes it fair.
So Katja, you're talking about the reasonable adjustments in the workplace. Are they, in the UK, is it a similar process if you're a student? Like, if a student comes to you and says, like, can I do this? What's your answer?
It really depends. So because I work in social, emotional and mental health, the answer is usually yes. Like, obviously, because of the nature of the school that we are very flexible around student needs. Like, for example, if a student comes in and says, I don't want to sit on a chair today, I want to lie on the floor in a beanbag and do my lesson on the floor, I'll be like, yeah, fine, because, you know, that's not affecting me in any way if a student wants to sit on a beanbag. So yeah, it's really flexible. There wouldn't be a lot, I don't think, that we would say no to, but that's setting dependent. So I could never say that in mainstream, like there's no way I'll be able to teach a lesson with kids lying on the floor.
Jay, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So I don't know a lot about it in secondary school terms. At the university level, from what I remember, unless it has changed slightly, you usually have to make some kind of application with supporting material from a clinical professional. I guess this is dependent upon what it is that you are seeking allowances for. And usually then you would have to also register through accessibility at the institution that you are studying at. And it's usually with them, in consultation with whatever documentation you've given, where you will decide what the reasonable adjustments are. And it was essentially the same thing in Canada for me as well. I would give that sort of documentation in order to get an appointment with accessibility at the university, then with a guidance counselor, I guess, or whatever you would call them, an advisor, an accessibility advisor. I would sit and discuss what my problems were, and then they would provide potential solutions or accommodations that could be made. Those then go to the department. One of the caveats in Canada, though, and I don't know if this applied in the UK, is they are suggestions and professors do not have to do them. So the accessibility can say, as a result of a high likelihood that I might have relapses or moments or whatever language you want to use, they would like it if professors could be a little bit relaxed about attendance. The professor can decide whether they want to do that or not. So I think there is, to some extent, a lot of people that go through these processes that think like, why am I doing it? But I think I should also say that no professor has ever refused to give me those. So I think it's rare that you come across somebody that will be that difficult about it when you've got clinicians and the whole accessibility department saying, hey, I think this person needs this.
I never asked for accommodations for a long... I mean, I was diagnosed when I was 15. When I was in high school, I had an eating disorder. I don't even remember getting the diagnosis the first time because I was just so into my eating disorder behavior, so it wouldn't have even occurred to me to ask for accommodations. When I went back to school in my late 20s and I got my psychology degree, I didn't ask for accommodations because I didn't trust people enough that they would treat me equally. So I ended up just reaching out to individual professors when I was having an issue. In terms of like who I told about my diagnosis, it was only a couple of teachers, and usually in the psychology department, because those are the people who I thought had the highest chance of actually understanding what I was talking about. If I had issues with other teachers, and I was also going through recovery at this time, so it wasn't as severe as when I was in high school or university the first couple times. So when I had issues with other teachers, I was just more vague about it. And I didn't give them some long thing. I was just like, I'm going through some personal stuff. Is it possible for me to reschedule X, Y, or Z deadline? And I don't think I ever got a lot of pushback on it because I wasn't giving them some long thing that they had to deal with. They were just like, okay, this is like, she's not asking for this all the time, so it seems reasonable. So on the topic of diagnosis, have you disclosed your diagnosis at school? Why or why not?
Yes. Since getting my diagnosis, I've been at two different universities doing two different programs. The first one, I think I told people because honestly, I was naive about what it actually meant. I didn't really understand. I didn't really realize that there was a lot of stigma because I was just focused. I was like, okay, this explains something. So now maybe this can help give friends around me some tools as well as me. Didn't work like that because people have other ideas. And when you go to Google, we all know what happens working in this space. A lot of what Google says is trash unless you do some digging. And I think that was my main objective. And then I disclosed as well to some teachers. And I think that was also a mistake because the professors that did know something about it tended to hold quite stigmatizing views of the diagnosis. And the ones that didn't did essentially what I said a moment ago and go to Google and find things out themselves, not from me. about what I was experiencing. Or there were also some that just simply didn't care and sort of treated me like I was finding some excuse for something. And then at my current institution, I'd say for the most part that hasn't happened. I think, however, it has happened a little more in my social relationships, and the reason why I disclosed is because all of my work is about BPD. There is really not much of a way that I can avoid that being public knowledge now. I'm part of this podcast. It's also what my thesis is about. I can't really get away from it. But in my social interactions, I feel like it's been used sometimes when I'm not doing okay to sort of frame me as like a bit of a ticking time bomb, and that I'm somebody that people shouldn't be around. I've also, had people say that if I have an issue with somebody or something and I don't want to, I'm not engaging in friendship anymore, it's because I've got a shame complex because I have BPD. I had a lot of these kinds of things going on, but in terms of my professional relationships, they've been much better, and I found profs more willing to learn from me about what it is that I need instead of treating me based on what they think they know of BPD.
I have also disclosed my diagnosis. So I did it when I was working in my mainstream school, and quite similar to what Jay said, I actually printed out information from a reputable source, because what I did not want the leadership team to do was to type it into Google and then reach their own conclusions. So I provided that information for them on both occasions, so BPD and with STPD as well. So I did that because I didn't want people to somehow find out that I've got these diagnoses, and I don't know how they would have, but just supposing that they did, and then having some kind of power over me by having that knowledge. I would rather take that power into my own hands and be open and transparent with it so that it couldn't be used against me potentially, which again is probably quite paranoid ideation, but it just made me feel more secure with that. And my head teacher was actually amazing. I think they actually had a relative with borderline personality disorder, so they were quite receptive to that, and they actually arranged for me to deliver training on personality disorders within the school, which was fantastic. And then the upshot of that was I found out that there were actually 3 of us with borderline personality disorder who worked in the school, so we had a little bit of a support network within ourselves, which was really good. So yeah, for me, in every setting where I've disclosed, it's never been a problem at all.
So like as an educator, my managers and coworkers know about my diagnosis, and I get a lot of support from them. But with my students, it's not something that I disclose, because as an educator, you want to be careful with what you're disclosing, and are you disclosing personal information because it's enhancing your students' learning? And in that way, I haven't disclosed my diagnosis. I have had a particular group of students that I did disclose that I had been hospitalized for a psychiatric hospitalization. And that was in the context of talking about working with people who are in the hospital for psychiatric diagnoses, what they might be thinking, feeling, going through, what they find to be helpful. And it was also in an environment in which everybody was kind of sharing more personal things. So I think that some disclosure, maybe not necessarily of the diagnosis, but of your personal life stories, can sometimes enhance the students' understanding and helps them kind of open their mind, helps them see things from a different perspective, and then just enhances their learning with the class.
Thank you everyone so much for watching. We hope you got a nugget of wisdom to take with you on your journey. We'll be back on Sunday with a fun brunch episode, and then next Wednesday we'll be back with a brand new topic. If you can't wait until then, consider supporting us on Patreon. Our top 2 tiers get early access to exclusive extended cuts of our Wednesday episodes. So check that out in the link down below, and we will see you next time.